Boardroom Bound, Episode 109, The Future of Corporate Governance with Darla Stuckey.
With the good questions, when you think about what makes a great board member, you do need some knowledge. And I got to tell you, there were people that kept us out of decisions that would have been difficult because they'd had the history of what had been done before. So that kind of bodes for you need some continuity on your board.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we're speaking with Darla Stuckey, and she is the CEO of the Society for Corporate Governance. And the easiest way to think about that is she knows everything about being a corporate secretary. And she has been one. So a place like New York Stock Exchange, American Express. And some of you might be thinking, that doesn't really sound that interesting. I don't really know why I need to know about it as a board member. This needs to be your best friend. This is one of the most important people you will be interacting with. And this person can help you and make your life so much better and easier. Darla's got great stories about how that works, some best practice ideas for you, and a lot of the knowledge and information that they share to help others to be their best in that role. I'm excited that we have a new sponsor of the show, Patina Solutions. Patina has asked me to host a webinar on February 9th. This event will be invaluable for most everyone in my audience since it's all about how to secure your first board seat. I'm guessing you're listening to this podcast because you want to join a board, but perhaps you're stymied by the process. If that's you, then join me as I host a webinar on February 9th. Participants will take away tools and gain expertise to help secure their first public or private company board seat. You can find more details in today's show notes or learn more at bit.ly/board seat. That's bit.ly/board seat. Now let's jump into today's episode. Darla Stuckey, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thanks, Alexander. I'm happy to be here.
Well, for me, this is great because we've been talking about it for a while. We've been trying to make schedules work, so I'm thrilled you're here with us today. And I want people to understand some of your background experience, which is fantastic, but also from your organization. So the Society for Corporate Governance has so much knowledge that you guys have accumulated over 75 years. There's so much great stuff that you're doing. But before I get into that, we unpack all those great details. Let's back it up a little bit for our audience, help them understand how did you get to the position you're in? And I will give a little of a teaser for some of our audience. You're going to hear about corporate secretary because you have had some of those amazing roles at places like the Stock Exchange and American Express. So I'm eager for us to share those stories today.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Alexander. Sorry, I'm just got the mental block against that. Let me just say, I started as a securities lawyer. I went to law school. I did not know what I wanted to do. I was the first in my family. I read the front page of the business section back in the go-go 80s, and all the hot, cool cases were takeover cases in the, in the law firm I was at had a securities litigation department, so I chose to do those takeover cases. And what's interesting when I look back is that that was the governance department before governance was really a thing. And I went from there. I have a little story about that. One of my first assignments was to help write an article about structural bias in special litigation committees. When this was, a function of Delaware law, when a shareholder wanted to sue derivatively, the shareholder had to seek demand on the board to have the board take the suit, unless it was futile to ask them to do so. And the futility would be that under the theory that board members wouldn't sue themselves or their friends. And there's a whole bunch of legal law around it, but it basically came down to personal relationships that the board members have with each other, and golf. They were the members of the same golf courses or churches or whatever, and they wouldn't sue themselves. And I was struck by that years later because even today, when you look at independence guidelines and things, there's still the idea that the board members are too friendly or not independent from each other or from the CEOs, and it just I think about it sometimes, it sort of never goes away. So the more things change, the more things really are still sort of fundamentally the same with respect to boards and how they operate. But I'd love to talk about that a little later.
Sure.
Let me go on I can just go on quickly to my next. So after my law firm days, I went to the New York Stock Exchange, and I was in the enforcement division for a while. I actually went to lunch in the company cafeteria, and outside the lunchroom there is a bulletin board with postings of jobs. I saw a job posting for an assistant corporate secretary. I did not know what it was, but I read the description, and I said, it talked about writing minutes and handling meetings and high-profile people, and I thought, well, I know how to redact minutes because I produce them in litigation, so I think I could probably write them, and I do know how to handle high-profile people because when you're at a big New York law firm, you get, clients that are like that. So I applied, and lo and behold, I got the job. So I ended up in an assistant secretary role at the NYSE, working for a very senior gentleman named Jim Buck, and the rest is history. 9/11 came. He then left. I was promoted to corporate secretary, and in that role, I got to see, a board that at the time the NYSE was a 501c6 association, which is the same thing as the society is now, which is interesting. So it was a very prescribed user group board. You had different categories of types of members that had to be on. So there was a Nom and Gov committee that was separate from the board that went through the different categories that were in the Constitution and picked people in those roles, and then they were there for certain terms, and then they had to leave. But so you had floor people, you had listed company execs, you had some public policy type or people representing the public. You had specialist firms and things like that. So it was quite interesting. But from there, I went to American Express. I got recruited to go to American Express, and they were the first public company board I ever watched. And that was also very fascinating. Again, a star-studded, sort of what you would consider a star-studded board with luminaries, and on at the time I was on. And
what was it like to watch that board experience, your first one?
Well, it was fascinating. It was fascinating. The fun stories and the convincing that they did beforehand, before the meeting started. I remember I always sat in the back chair. There's lots of stories about where you sit and what room you're in, but I sat in the back and or kind of around on the side, and I was very quiet, and I just took everything in, watched their faces, listened to them. I do think the role of a corporate secretary is very much to watch and observe, and I think I'm a good observer, but it always struck me when they weren't engaged or if they looked like they were lost. I think that's one of the things the corporate secretary can do is sort of get to them the information they need. So if they're not following some presentation, you can tell on their faces when you're in the room. You can see who gets it and who doesn't, who's prepared and who's not. Interesting. Let me just go back a little bit, because when I was at the NYSE, after Dick Grasso left unceremoniously, we had a chair come in who worked for $1 for a time, and his name was John Reed, and he was famous from Citigroup, from the Altria board, and he had the job of putting a completely new board together. So I was someone who got to actually have the existing board members turn in their resignation letters. So that was a job of a corporate secretary. So we got rid of the entire board that Dick had, and we got a whole new board and a whole new constitution. And when John Reed came in, he was pretty scary. I mean, he was a very high profile guy. So he came down to my office the second day he was there, first day he was there, and he said, "You're the corporate secretary, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Come, walk with me, show me the boardroom." So we walked down the hall, 11 Wall Street, 6th floor of 11 Wall. We called it 11 Wall. And we went into the boardroom. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a huge room. It has Lely glass on the ceiling. No, Tiffany glass on the ceiling, not Lely. Tiffany glass on the ceiling. And it has a huge urn from Fabergé that was a gift from the Tsar, Nicholas, I think the floating Revolutionary War bond.
Wow.
It is so valuable, it is uninsurable. When they replace the carpet, they cut around it and carpet around it because you can't move it, you can't touch it. So John Reed cast his eyes into this huge room with a table that held about 30 people. And he said to me, "We will never, ever hold another board meeting in this room. Show me the other rooms." So he picked a very small room with a table of 6, 2 chairs in the back, or, behind the person at the end. And so there's a total of like 8 people, and he composed a board of 6 people, and the the general counsel, and myself are the only other two people in the room. And he was masterful, and I only realized much later why he did what he did. But he composed a new board. Everybody, again, very quickly got all those board members talking. They made the decisions. They made the decisions about how they're going to compensate themselves and all the other stuff, which was fascinating to watch. So that was actually a cool story when he took a look at the board. And it wasn't going to be a big ceremonial thing to him. It was going to be the real work, I think, and that's what he got done. It was a huge change.
And so, Darla, let me ask a question here and get your thoughts on this, because I imagine for many of the people listening, they're of the mindset that one of the board's, if not primary, secondary roles, one of the most important things they're doing is finding the CEO, nurturing the CEO, looking after the CEO, sometimes replacing the CEO. And in this case, it almost sounds like the stories we heard before of, oh, the CEO is going to pick their own board, they're going to put people in the room. And I realize this was a unique situation because Dick left and John came in, et cetera. Help people understand how they should think about the story you just told.
Well, that's a good question. Again, the NYSE was still a 501c6 corporation at that time.
Okay.
And I think that may be a difference. It is. I mean, the NYSE board members were paid somewhat, but when I think to my board, the society board, which is also a membership association, because remember, it was floor members. You bought a seat and you were a member. So membership associations sometimes have volunteer boards, or board members that make donations. That's more of a charitable board. But I think the difference there is the CEO does lead it. Yes, there's a nom and gov committee at the society. There was a nom and gov committee at the NYSE before Dick left. I don't believe we had a nom and gov committee. He actually did sort of handpick that board, actually, and he must have had the power to do that with the SEC when they approved it, because we were self-regulated then. That was really unique. But the nom and gov committee that are independent nom and gov committees work. I think they actually work pretty well. They're not existing board members, but they most likely were board members. So at least that's the case for the society. And they work with the CEO many times. In fact, the NYSE did this after I left. They actually took suggestions from the public, so recommendations from the public on board members. And
wow.
and after I left, there were some people that got nominated by public people and who made it to the NYSE board. We have the same kind of procedure at the society. We solicit our members on anybody that they want to nominate, and so it is a little different. Public companies don't really work like that. They have nominating and governance committees, as you know, that are subsets of the full board, and they're charged with finding new people. And I think they have. Now they have more autonomy than maybe they did in the past, but they are charged with whether they have a full-blown matrix or whatever. But looking at what the needs are, what the strategy is, and what holes there are. And I know you've had people talk about this on the show before, and that's like a whole nother conversation we could have, because it is quite fascinating. But
right.
I don't want to get off on that tangent, but
no, this is a wonderful tangent, right? And in some ways, because people think the New York Stock Exchange, like, you could not get more important in terms of the business world and the types of people that are probably on there. And in the same part, your next experience at American Express, again, one of the most recognizable names in the world. Now, clearly a public company, different rules and regulations you have to follow, but still the same incredible caliber of people in the room. So you have had these very interesting experiences. But now you're in that environment, clearly not going to be 6 people in that small room, probably more of that grand type space, bigger environment. Did it feel like a culture shock?
Yes. It did feel like a culture shock. And I didn't, it wasn't, the difference too was the brand new board or the change. Again, when you have directors with a term who are only there 3 years, 6 years, 4 years, 5 years, something like that, you lose directors frequently, and you've only got them there for a certain time. What I did notice when I got to the American Express board is there were people on there that had been on there for years. They were good friends. They knew Kent and also who was the CEO at the time. They probably had picked him. Obviously, that happened before I got there, but you had people like Henry Kissinger and Gerald Ford as an advisory director, and Vernon Jordan were still there when I got there. So, such impressive names. I was even almost afraid to walk into the room. And,
right.
the good news there is that people like Vernon made me feel very welcomed, which was wonderful. I have nothing but fond memories of that board and those people, slight though they are. And I didn't stay in the room with that board for too long, about a year and a half. And then I went to do the bank boards, which was a different kind of board, but equally as interesting. These were subsidiary boards. So banks are regulated, and American Express has, banks that issue the credit cards. So they had to have boards with independent people, at least a majority, or I think we had even 50% independent board members and 50%, non-independent, which were former executives at American Express who now ran the banks. And for that group, it wasn't so much the shareholders that were our overseers and to whom we were accountable, but it was the banking regulators. And this happened during the banking crisis. So I jumped from like the NYSE having a huge crisis to going into American Express when we then I weathered the 2008 financial crisis there, where I learned what the term price for risk means, which was fascinating and what we could see at the banks and with credit card payments coming into that crisis, which was kind of interesting too. But those boards were quite. I actually liked those boards quite a lot because you had half of them knew everything about the business because they'd been at American Express. Half of them didn't. So with the good questions, when you think about what makes a great board member, you do need some knowledge. And I got to tell you, there were people that kept us out of, some bad things, or not bad things, but decisions that would have been difficult because they'd had the history of what had been done before. So that kind of bodes for you need some continuity on your board. If it's not an insider and you've got outside independent directors, you still need some continuity, because what you find when you get to be my age is things just keep coming around again. It folds back on itself. It's like, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't we do this? And you're like, yeah, we tried that 10 years ago. Well, maybe things have changed, but maybe they haven't. And maybe 10 years ago you made a decision not to do it for a very good reason. So, that I found fascinating about those subsidiary boards that were regulated, that had this sort of quasi-independence and quasi-non-independent, status. So, anyway, I'll slow down there. I did want to talk about get to the role of the corporate secretary.
Well, yeah, no, that's
Exactly.
great. And I want to do a deep dive into that, but I also want to give a little more context. So after American Express, you went to Society for Corporate Governance, and you had a variety of roles. You're clearly leading the organization as the CEO now, but you're sort of related to what you're doing before, but almost a little bit on the other side of the fence, right? So you're clearly talking with a lot of corporate secretaries, training them, upskilling them, giving them the information that they need. How would you describe what you guys do today? The organization's been around for about 75 years, so you guys have a lot of history and knowledge.
Yes. Well, what we do today is what I think most professional associations do for their members: networking, education, advocacy, and we give them resources. And those are sort of the four core tenets. But my real role, to me, what I do is I'm the champion of the people that are sitting in that seat. I think they are just the best people around in many ways. They are the unsung heroes. I love what they do because I loved my experiences there. I think they can make a difference. And my goal is to get them more recognition and to kind of hold them up and accelerate them. So training, yes. Professional development, yes. Networking with their peers to figure out how to solve problems that they have in their boardrooms that other people also have, yes. We advocate for things to make their lives easier and their corporations run more smoothly. Yes, that's a newer thing. We've only started doing that when I got there in 2009. Corporate governance is, it's amazing. I again, going back to my days at the law firm, I never knew corporate governance was going to be as hot as it was, and it remains that way, for good or ill. But when the federal government, gets into rulemaking around disclosure and things that companies have to do, that's really interesting. That was very different. That had never been the case. It's usually it was Delaware state law that what most companies, organize themselves under, and the fiduciary duty standard under Delaware law is how directors, is the standard to which directors are primarily held, and, companies went their way. And then it took the scandals, Enron and then the financial crisis and, to get us where we are today. So it's been a great industry to be in. I'm never bored. There's all these new things, whoever could have guessed that we would have to learn about complex minerals for complex minerals disclosure. There's just all kinds of crazy things. So the people in the society membership many of them are corporate secretaries. Some of them don't have that particular title. They have other titles. They also have legal titles. I would say about half of them are lawyers, not all of them. But many of them do disclosure work for the companies they serve. So they're writing the 10Ks or the proxy statements. They can be compensation attorneys. They, in-house compensation attorneys. They can be risk folks. They can also do ESG work. Not so many that do straight up ESG work, I would say, but what's happening in the ESG space is it's becoming so important that it's making its way into the disclosure documents and the strategies of the companies. So when it gets to that level, of course, it's at the board, and the corporate secretary is, the person that gets to know a little bit about everything that the corporation does. And that's why I also think they're a great group of people, because they're very knowledgeable about a lot of things. And it's not that they've done every role in the company, but they have to know enough about it to write about it, because they have to minute it. And, why do they minute it? They have to prove that the board is exercising its fiduciary duty properly. They're the proof. They're the doers, How do you. So the role is quite important. And most people don't know what it is. When I was younger, I was at a cocktail party. I couldn't say I was a corporate secretary. People would ask me how many words a minute I typed.
Right.
So you have to, it's unfortunate, but we actually had a speaker on our conference last week, Barry Lawson Williams, who's a fabulous man, told an excellent story. We were dying about his mother, who had been very high in the education world in New York State and was at one point late in life asked to be the secretary of the teachers union or the local group, I forget what it was. And she was offended that she was asked to be the secretary. And he called her son and told him, and he said, "No, Mom, I think that's a good role." So, it's unfortunately it's got that word. And, we have changed our title because quite frankly, partly because of the word and partly because we wanted to be more inclusive to other governance professionals as the corporate governance community grows. So, in any event, that's a short way to say what we do and what I like to do for the members. One of my pet peeves is that in many companies, the general counsel also holds the corporate secretary title, and that I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think there's a variety of reasons, but it seems to me that the role of the corporate secretary is important enough, and there are enough responsibilities that should be a separate person, and both should be in the boardroom. And I always think back to my days at the NYC when there were just 6 board members and 2 chairs in the back for the GC and the corporate secretary. But anyway, that would be that's one of the things I would love to fix. But the corporate secretary, their job is really to make sure the boards get the information, the materials they need, have everything they need, and then they document that what took place at the board meetings, and those are the records of the corporation. So I do think you had said, you had mentioned to me, that people should know who their corporate secretary is.
That should be their best friend when they join a board. Like if you get brought onto American Express, the corporate secretary, that's got to be your new best friend, right?
Yes, the best friend, or yes. I like to, the other thing is, I didn't do this at the parent company level, but at the bank board level, when we got new directors in, I had, literally you talk to them and you say, okay, here's what it's going to be like when you walk in the room.
Yep.
Here's what you're going to expect to hear. Here's who talks the most. Here's who always asks this question. Here's who doesn't say a word. If you don't know the acronyms, please ask, or I can give you a sheet of acronyms, or I can stop the meeting and say, excuse me, what's that acronym? I need it for the minutes, which I did on many occasions just because I could look around the room and see that people were lost with all the acronyms.
Clever.
So, little tricks like that, you just do. You want to serve them. You want them to do their job well. And yeah, they should be. The board members should treat their corporate secretary as their best friend, and they can ask for anything, and you'll get it for them. And and you're the go-between between them and the CEO. If in fact they, for whatever reason, don't want to talk directly to the CEO, although I think most of the time these days, board members talk directly to their CEO. But if you have a smaller question or issue that you think doesn't rise to the level of his time or her time, then you certainly could talk to your corporate secretary about those things. So.
Well, I think especially the way you touched on it there, some organizations are notorious for having amazing onboarding for new board members. Others, it pales in comparison to what it should be. And especially in those situations, the corporate secretary is really your best friend to help you. Not only it's just the scheduling the meetings, and you should be whispering, pro tip for anybody who's on your new board, make sure you're whispering in the ear of the corporate secretary who's got to schedule the meetings. If you've got some conflicts in advance that are coming up when they're scheduling the next year or two out, make sure you tell them earlier. It's much easier to work around it then as opposed to the data's gone out there. That's less embarrassing. But, there's someone who can get you up to speed. I love the way you described it there, Darla. You're trying to arm the people to have the right information so they can be successful in their limited time in the boardroom.
Yeah, and we do, and I say we, I still consider myself, but even though I'm a CEO, I still consider myself a corporate secretary at heart. But anyway, the other thing that they do is also, on the flip side, any management presenter that has to go into the board to present that might be, intimidated or, somewhat unknowledgeable or first time, novice, always talk to the corporate secretary. It's like knowing which judge is going to be the hot one on a hot bench. I mean, who's going to speak first? Who does this? What's the dynamic in the boardroom? And what have they already heard? What do you not need to say because they know this and their eyes will roll, and what do they not? So you do it. You do it. Kind of both ways, but definitely orienting. And when you onboard a new board member, it is a lot of scheduling, and I've seen a couple of different things. At the NYSE, we basically ran all the heads of the sort of business lines and regulation, and we had them there for a day or day and a half, and just had the people come in, the heads come in and sit with them for 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it took. And I was always struck by some of those guys, those industry guys with such knowledge. You brought the regulators in, and of course they were all over that, They knew exactly what the regulators did. Next. You brought a listed company board member in there, and you had the listings people in front of them, and they're like, yep, and what about this? And what about, I mean, the dialogue was so robust. Again, that's a group of people that have in-depth knowledge of the exchange on which they're now sitting on the board. Similar to the society, we orient our board members, but we orient them more about the business aspects of the society and how our revenue works and how the financials work and the tax returns, because they know all the advocacy, they know the policy issues, they know all that stuff. So, because that's what they do in their own job. So it's interesting, though. We had some fun times in orientation. I had to orient Martha Stewart when she was kind of in the middle of her troubles, but she was nothing but nice to me and very, very nice and very kind, and I was in awe of that at the time. So anyway.
Well, I imagine you might have also gotten a couple tips for how the room could be laid out as the conversation went on too.
Well, I was pretty intimidated because at the first meeting we have to throw a dinner. So one of my fun facts is like when you have to tell a story of something nobody knows about you. It's like, I actually threw a dinner for Martha Stewart. But it wasn't just for her, but it was kind of one of my claims to fame. So.
Well, I love the way you're talking about it here in a very jovial way. Your job is to help the board members succeed. And in many ways, the Society for Corporate Governance, you're helping your members succeed. And I know you guys do a certain amount of training and education for the members that we've talked about it. And maybe we can just spend a couple of minutes what that looks and feels like and the value that you guys bring. For example, I know that you've got the Governance Professionals Handbook that's out there, and there's different information and training and events like that. Can you give us a bit of an overview?
Sure. We have very recently just put out a Governance Professionals Handbook, and we did this in connection with our new certification program. So it is, designed for sale to people that want to take the test, but it certainly is, you don't have to take the test to buy it if you want. It would be great for anybody sort of new to the role or anybody that wants refreshing on what it is that, it's kind of the minimum qualifications to be in the role and to take minutes and to do all the filings that are required for a public company. There is stuff about private companies in there as well. We are Our other biggest educational piece is our Essentials program that we do that doesn't change much from year to year. We tweak it, but it's the same topics. And we do that every January. And then we start with fundamentals of corporate governance, and, we go through internal and external sources of authority. Quite fascinating. Well, how does the board get to do what they do? Where is the authority that says they can do this and they can do that? And what does the CEO do? And what does the management do that the board doesn't do? And what does the board do that the management can't do? And so there's a section on that. Then how you actually structure and compose your board and committee meetings, the timing, the calendars, who goes to what, where, all the way down to board preparation and materials, subsidiary management. I'm missing some things. Minutes, of course, which everybody wants. We can never do enough minutes writing courses. And anyway, it's just a great program, and it's great because it's also taught by some of our board members and some of the senior people who basically like to do this just to give back. And you find that the people in the sessions are just like sieves. They sit there and they don't move, even though we are in January in Florida. They don't move from the inside of a dreary conference room. They listen, they take notes. They're just anxious to get, everything down. And a lot of it is like, yes, I do that, check, yes, and then some of it's like, oh my God, I haven't done that yet. Or, oh no, I haven't done that yet. I have to go back and do that. So, that's the kind of the training, and it's that we've done for years, and that's a really good basic training course, and I think that's really a very large part of our mission. The advocacy stuff is a lot of fun and high profile, and get to meet with members of Congress and testify on occasion. But really, the bread and butter of how you're going to keep the profession knowing what it needs to know and evolving is in training the new members and the new people in the role. And we still have a steady drumbeat of them. We have a steady flow of them every year. Yeah.
Well, I will say, as a governance geek, that sounds like a great time to me, and that might not be true for everybody, but boy, that sounds like several fun days, even if you are locked in a room. And Darla, we are thrilled to hear about your individual experience being a corporate secretary, and then what that looks like in the organization where you're helping everybody else to bring their best practices, and great stories that you shared with us today of some of the glitz and the glamour, perhaps, that's also involved in a bit of the role. And we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Darla Stuckey. It was great fun hearing her stories about being a corporate secretary and some of the high-powered people that she was working with. John Reed, Martha Stewart, etc. The major organizations she was working with, American Express, New York Stock Exchange, what it was actually like being a corporate board secretary. And I think you really would understand that she was thinking, I am trying to make my board members be as successful as they can be, whatever I can do to help them in so many ways. So I want you to be taking away from this thinking that corporate secretary really needs to be my best friend, someone I want to work closely with, and that will help me bring my best self to the boardroom. And remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you will find links to all of today's resources. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.